we will see what kind of political philosophies people came up with in the wake of the Industrial Revolution. So that's what we're going to discuss. Okay. Basically, to make a long story short, there were four things developed during the Industrial Revolution, this period. I remember what it was, the period, 1760s, 1880s. Okay, that's the time when the Industrial Revolution was unfolding. Okay, so during this time and later, people developed the four, I would say, political philosophies. Okay, and these political philosophies either complemented or replaced religions. Okay, because traditional religions were losing their power and prestige in the eyes of the people. So the first, I don't want to break the sequence. Let me see what was the first. Okay, okay. The first, liberalism. That was the first response, or the first ideology that emerged during the time of Industrial Revolution. Liberalism. But look, in parentheses, I will write the word classical. Classical liberalism. Liberalism. Otherwise, you will be confused, right? Because what today we call liberalism here in the United States is not what in other countries, or at that time, they have understood by the word liberalism. Okay, so you have to put this classical liberalism. Classical liberalism. I don't know why is it in the United States we use liberalism in a different. It carries totally different meaning from what it had at that time. Okay, the best way to describe this classical liberalism is to say libertarianism. You heard about libertarians, right? That's what it is. If you Americans, for you to kind of comprehend what it was at that time. So let's use this word libertarianism. Libertarianism. Libertarians. Is it clear?
You should explain what libertarianism is.
Oh, okay. Can you explain to us?
It's like that you don't want the government to have a role in the society. So it's kind of like laissez-faire, I guess, but with like general society instead of just the market.
Correct. Correct. Yeah, I appreciate it. So libertarianism, it's when you don't like government to be present in economic life and political life. So the less government, the better. So let people organize their life on the ground. Let them develop their own businesses, decide, make their own decisions. Okay. So that's what means libertarianism. You know probably from this political, from our political debates that today in the United States, part of this libertarianism is used by so-called conservatism. Okay, not completely, because libertarianism they don't care about religion so much, because you worship whatever religion you want. Okay, so which is kind of a little bit different from present-day conservatives, because some, not everybody, but some conservatives today, they care very much about religion. Okay, it's a big deal for them. Okay. So I'm trying to make it clear. Is it clear? Right? So classical liberalism, it's a laissez-faire, it's hands-off. Remember Adam Smith. Adam Smith is the hero for these people. In Europe, they still use the same expression, liberalism. That is why when Europeans and Americans meet each other, they don't understand what they are talking about. So each time when I go to Russia or another European country, like Estonia, I have to explain to them when I talk about American liberals who these people are. You know? Because in the United States today, liberal is a person who loves a big government, welfare. I'm not offending anybody. I'm just saying how it is. You know, I'm not saying it's good or bad. You know, and plus you are comfortable with a big government. That's what a liberal is in the United States today. So it's very much different from classical liberalism. So don't confuse these two things. That is why I put this word here. Okay. Adam Smith. Remember we talked about Adam Smith. So he became a hero for these people, classical liberals. Who were these classical liberals? And basically people, mostly people who wanted to make money. who wanted to do business. Merchants, these manufacturers who owned these textile factories, okay? So these were these people. Bankers who didn't have rights under the old regime. That is why they hated aristocrats, because aristocrats didn't give them voice. They couldn't elect their own leaders, okay? So they made these revolutions. I'm simplifying the whole story. They made these revolutions, especially American Revolution, French Revolution. These were middle-class revolutions, and partially English too, although in England they shared, remember, House of Lords and House of Commons. They shared the power, okay? So got the point, right? So the classical liberalism, it's the ideology of rising middle class, okay? Free trade, individualism, the catchword here, of course, the first one, laissez-faire. That's the first catchword. Laissez-faire, which means, it's a French word. What does it mean? Hands off. So government, hands off. Don't interfere into my life. But another key word you have to remember, individualism. Okay? So that was important for classical liberalism. So it means they treat people not as members of groups, but as individuals. Okay? And another important point for classical liberals or libertarians is to respect the law. So formally, everybody should be equal in the eyes of law. No preferences for anybody. That's what upset very much middle-class people and common people about the old regimes, because under, for instance, Louis XIV or in other European countries, there were different sets of law. One law was for aristocrats, another law for church, and the third law for the third estate in France, for instance, for the middle class and peasants. And when people committed certain kind of crimes, misdemeanors, or felonies, using American jargon, so they were tried not in nationwide courts. They were tried in church courts, aristocratic courts, or in middle class courts. So after these revolutions happened, American Revolution and French Revolution especially, the courts became common courts for everybody. So everybody was treated equal in the eyes of the law. It's very important. Free trade. Remember, free trade did not exist before these revolutions. Okay? Before the Industrial Revolution. Before the American, English and French Revolution. And Industrial Revolution. Before that, free trade hardly existed because each country practiced so-called mercantilism. They tried to hoard money, chunks of gold and silver. In some countries, they didn't understand about investment, okay, like in Spain and Portugal. It was only in England and Holland. Okay. Less government, the better. That's the same, okay. And they also said that, unfortunately, whether we like it or not, there will be losers and winners. You know, you cannot make people equal. Okay. Because during the French Revolution, especially Jacobins, for instance, they tried to push further the French Revolution, trying to say that it's not only about equal opportunities. We should create equal outcomes for everybody. Okay, so middle-class people were against this. Okay, they said, well, you know, if you want to invite trouble, yeah, go this way, you know. And yes, correct. And the Jacobins, they got out of control. But they said, unfortunately, there will be always winners and losers, whether we like it or not. And a lot of people didn't like this talk. And to the present day, a lot of people hate this talk. If you talk like this, you will be the enemy of the people. Okay, but that's why. But that's how they thought. You know, again, I'm not saying it's good or bad. I'm just saying how it was and how it is. Okay. The greatest hero of the classical liberals was a man named Richard Cobden, who kind of exemplified this philosophy of classical liberalism. Richard Cobden. He was a great liberty thinker. What was he famous for? He was famous for so-called, for repealing so-called corn laws. Okay? Corn laws. What were these corn laws about? In England, the prices of bread were very high before 1840s. So 1840s. Corn laws repealed. Corn at that time, and I guess in some parts of England to the present day, is used just to describe bread, what we call bread, grain. Okay, it's when they talk, not necessarily corn, maize. It's about barley, rye, and all this bread. Okay, so the bread was very expensive in Britain before 1840s. Okay, why? Because the government had huge tariffs. So Russia and who else? Germany, they could not import grain in England because they had to pay high tariffs. It wasn't profitable for them. So Richard Cobden, who actually did express interests of merchants who wanted to go back and forth and trade the grain and make money, you know. So you have to understand, it was not just his compassion for working class people. But he did use this argument. He said, the bread is very expensive. Why don't we kind of lift the customs barriers and allow all other countries to bring their grains and sell them here? Working class people will have cheap grain. Working class people will have cheap bread because there would be competition. Our farmers, English farmers, would compete with Russian shippers of grain or German farmers. Okay, and English farmers hated it because they enjoyed these high prices for grain. But he was able to sway working class people and the people in the government, and eventually convinced the English Parliament to repeal corn laws. So corn laws were repealed, and in 20 years the prices of bread went down, and English common people, working people, didn't have to spend so much for food anymore. Okay, it was good for the people. Although it did benefit greatly merchants whose interests Richard Cobden expressed. Okay, so in this case, two classes benefited: merchants and common people, working class people, which was good for everybody because these people were the majority of society. He defended this principle of free trade, non-intervention. He was against wars. He said the war is a trouble because war separates people. If we have trade, so there will be no room for the war because people are so much connected through trade, they can't fight each other. So that was his argument. Okay. At the same time, we have a second group of people who hated industrial revolution, who hated the modern world, what was coming quickly. Again, it's conservatism. Conservatism. Again, what today was conservatism is very different from what today we call conservatism in the United States, within the United States. So please keep this in mind. So who were these conservatives? Mostly clergy, church people, who obviously didn't like factories, didn't like women living alone in cities, okay? Because in their eyes they were loose, remember? Nobles, aristocrats, they also hated it because they didn't get used to work hard. They liked to spend money, but they didn't like to make money. Didn't like to work to make money, okay? Because many of them inherited these castles, land estates, but this industrial lifestyle squeezed them out. Some of them got in debt, and they hated it because they owed money to merchants, bankers. Okay. Peasants hated it too. Peasants were against factories, as we know, Luddites and all these things. They were also against popular democracy because they thought that if you expand rights, so you might give rights to ignorant people who don't know how to make decisions. Okay. It should be only the elite of the aristocrats who should rule. That is why they didn't like these revolutions, like English Revolution, American Revolution, and especially the French Revolution. Okay. And another thing, and that is why I'm saying that that conservatism, that old conservatism, is very much different from what today we call in the United States conservatism. They love the big government, okay, because they love the kings. They love the kings. And they said that the kings and queens should call the shots, should control. When you don't control things, you create anarchy, chaos. It's dangerous. You always have to have some kind of structure that controls things. That's what they love, okay? Conservatives at that time. Yeah, the government should control the trade and shouldn't let people stray away. You know, everybody should respect the hierarchy. of classes, the king on the top, aristocrats, second kind of layer, then church people and the common people on the bottom. That is why they love the Middle Ages. They romanticize the Middle Ages. Okay. I mentioned last time the Romantic movement, romantic paintings, romantic music, and many of these romantics, romantic poets, artists, they kind of embraced old lifestyle, embraced these aristocrats. Okay. That's important to remember. Edmund Burke is considered the father of modern conservatism. What was special about Edmund Burke? Edmund Burke was not like many of the people who supported him, actually. He was a bit different. On the one hand, he said tradition and religion are very important. So we should stick to the old times. We should respect tradition and religion. At the same time, he issued a limited support for American Revolution and English Revolution, but he did not support the French Revolution. See, he kind of made thought outside of the box. You know, he said, I'm going to accept but limited revolutions. See, he was happy with English Revolution. Why? Because English Revolution didn't give rights to many people, right? Remember, in England, only 4% of the people received the right to make decisions, to vote. City folks who lived in cities and aristocrats. In the United States, a little bit more people were enfranchised, like farmers, white farmers. But still, the majority of population, especially women, half of the society didn't have rights. They couldn't vote, they couldn't testify in courts, they couldn't sign the papers, for goodness sake. That's what it means you are a non-citizen. So men had to act on their behalf. You know. Women needed to do something, you know. So that was the fact of life. And Edmund Burke said, that's how it should be. So I'm accepting partially American Revolution, completely embrace English Revolution, but the French Revolution that gave rise to all males, it's a slippery slope. It's a very dangerous, okay? See, he kind of made this partial acceptance, okay? Edmund Burke, the father of modern conservatism. Conservatism became very popular in Eastern Europe. The countries which hated England, the United States, France, because they had these revolutions. Austria, Prussia, it's the biggest Germanic state. Germany was still divided into many kingdoms, okay? Like 40 plus something kingdoms, I don't remember exact number. The Prussia was the biggest kingdom, Germanic kingdom, and it was a very conservative kingdom. Austria, Russia, so they were like bastions of conservatism. And Nicholas I, Russian Tsar, he actually said, I'm going to help European conservatives to to roll back these revolutions. Because middle class, these shopkeepers, they hated England, the United States. They called them nations of shopkeepers. Okay? Because they dealt with money. they were selling things. They were building factories. It's dangerous. It creates this old lifestyle. Okay? So this backward country, economically, Russian Empire decided to be the shield of conservatism in Europe. Okay? And Nicholas I sent armies against, especially in Germanic kingdoms, where people tried to revolt and kick out lords, give rights to peasants. So he sent armies to suppress these revolts. Okay. All right, we're moving further. And finally, there's something new. Okay, you want me to roll back? Something new. Those of you who already. Something new came to dominate life of the people in the beginning of the 19th century. Socialism, which did not exist before. Socialism was the child of the modern age. It emerged along with these women, along with the women and later men who moved to the cities, who came to work in factories, okay, who worked together under the same roof. So kind of they became a kind of susceptible material, fertile ground for socialism, fertile ground for socialism. These new factors. Okay, I'm moving forward, so please follow my pace. Okay, so we have socialism, which is a modern phenomenon. It did not exist before. Okay, so you have to keep it in mind. It comes along with the Industrial Revolution, and some intellectuals started speaking on behalf of the working class people, these women and men who worked for 15 hours sometimes, and who were discontent. Many of them were discontent because of the long working day, unemployment, and all these things. Okay, so the first socialists, they were peaceful people, and they became known as utopians. They simply pleaded with the government, pleaded with these manufacturers, bankers, so let's ease the life of working class people. How? Let's share with them. Let's, owners of factories, include workers into shares. Okay? Talk with them, consult them. Make something good for them. Set up schools. Okay? Build the houses for them, because they live in this tenant housing, overcrowded. And they also argued that the state should step in and redistribute the wealth, increase the taxes, do something for working class people. And the government should kind of be like a middleman, okay? Should control things, because these factory owners, they're getting out of control. Okay? So let's not allow them to make too much money. So they pleaded, they tried to convince society, so let's just give government a power to to police these new manufacturers, factory owners. Let's force them to do something for working class people. Okay? Utopian socialists. And one of the first utopian socialists famous was Henri, it's a French name, Andrei Znamenski, okay, the most prominent utopian socialist. He actually wrote a book called The New Christianity, 1823. That's how they thought about socialism. It's like a new religion based on reason. Okay, Andrei Znamenski. Here we go. Andrei Znamenski argued that we should create this religion of reason. Remember the French revolutionaries who argued the same thing? We should use science as the new religion. Okay? And we should put in charge of the government, so-called, he called it Council of Newton, a committee of scientists who would control the government, who would develop the government scientifically. And he called it the New Christianity. See? His student, Auguste Comte, went further. He dropped the word Christianity. He started to call it religion of humanity. Okay? Expert scientists should be in charge of the government. They should plan the economy, centralized planning, everything should be planned. How many pencils we should produce, how many shoes we should make. Everything should be planned from up above. Don't allow these rich pigs to decide how many shoes they should produce. The government should decide, and they should distribute them fairly. Okay? So his students were the first who called themselves socialists, and that's how this word became popular. Okay? Henri Saint-Simon, the pioneer of socialism. In England, there was a guy like this. His name was Robert Owen. Maybe you heard Robert Owen, who tried to create this model communities of people where they practiced socialistic lifestyle, working together, sharing things together. He actually came to the United States, Robert Owen, in 1825. Here we go. He's right here. Here in the United States, in Indiana, he set up a socialistic community called New Harmony. And they tried to work together, but in 3 years everything fell apart. They started to argue who worked more. People started thinking that I work more than the other guy, so he had fist fights. Everybody tried to help themselves from the common storage where they had the food, and eventually no food was produced. Because people, unfortunately, don't work in general for no money. They want to work for themselves or for their families. So he miserably failed, but he didn't lose the faith in his experiment. So he came back to England and he started a cooperative movement. So he said, oh, if this sharing, total sharing didn't work out, let's just set up cooperatives. Co-ops. So he was one of the leaders of cooperative movement in England. He was a very noble man. He helped his workers. He reduced the working hours. He built for them schools, houses. But unfortunately, he went bankrupt because those ruthless capitalists who competed with him, so they outdid him. Because I guess he was too noble. But nice man, personally. Okay? And he tried to convince society to do something for the working class people. Okay? But not everybody was happy about this pleading and begging. There were some militant socialists. There were some radical socialists who said, you cannot convince these rich pigs. They are not going to share with you. They are bad people. Okay? So that's how communism comes to the picture. Okay? So communism, it's a militant form of socialism. Okay, that's what it is. They are kind of together. Communism was growing out of socialism. And the communism and socialism, what they did, they reflected the interest of the working class people. So a lot of workers, they kind of like this stuff. Moderate workers like socialism, like a soft version of communism. Militant workers, unemployed people, embraced communism. And here the name I would like you to remember, Karl Marx, a German Jewish journalist, okay? Who originated from the famous local family of rabbis, a great thinker. So he was unhappy about these utopians. He said, these are fools, they try to plead. We need a revolution. We need to take it from them. That's what he argued. He had a friend. He didn't work at all. He was just writing articles. He had nothing, very poor. But fortunately, he befriended a German textile manufacturer who had textile factories in England, in Manchester. His name was Frederick Engels. And he had a lot of money. And that's how he lived. So Engels provided him with money. And Karl Marx had the chance to write his books and brochures. Together they wrote this brochure, a small tiny book called The Communist Manifesto, 1848. That's when they wrote this. They were kicked out from many Germanic states, so eventually both of them are relocated to France. In France they met a Jewish guy named Moses Hess, who called himself communist. That's how they started to call themselves communists too. So the German Jewish guy, philosopher Moses Hess, who said socialism is not enough, I'm a communist. And that's how Marx and Engels started calling themselves communists. They like this word, okay? Commune. So it's enforcement of socialism on the people. Okay, let's see what they said in the Communist Manifesto. Wait a second, it's not here yet. The Communist Manifesto said that pleading is not enough. What you need a revolution. Revolution. These people, working class people who live in cities, these women and men who work in textile factories, railroad industries, coal mines, They should get together and revolt against manufacturers, capitalists. And they should take power in their own hands. And what they need dictatorship of proletariat. Okay, dictatorship of proletariat. So they endorse dictatorship. For the sake of the people, of course. That's how it was. So dictatorship of the proletariat. The last would be the first. Okay? The last would be the first, as the Bible said. So the oppressed people should revolt against their oppressors. Okay? Should kick them out and destroy the private property. Private property is the biggest evil. That's the third thing that Communist Manifesto said. So private property, and I will cross it like this. For them it was the horrible thing. So they said everything should be nationalized, socialized. People should share everything. Okay, should work together. There should be labor armies, and the government during a transition from this bad system of capitalism to good system of communism. The government should police society, should organize people in labor armies. Okay, should phase out the rich people because they are not going to give up their wealth. Okay, that's what they said. But they explained to this. See that what was so attractive about their philosophy. I want to tell you that this book, Communist Manifesto, became the second most popular book after the Bible. So it was translated in numerous languages, including some kind of exotic languages like Mongolian language. I saw it in Mongolia, the translation of this book myself. So there was something about this book that made it popular. Okay, what made it so attractive? That they essentially offered people two things. In the same package. They offered people science and religion, science and prophecy, okay? Because at that time people were hooked on science, remember? Religion of reason, this miraculous inventions, steam engine, everything. They thought the science would be able to perform miracles. It's so powerful. Let's use science to perfect the life of the people. So they found this quote-unquote scientific explanation for why society needed the revolution, needed communism, okay? They argued that at first, at the dawn of humankind, people lived in primitive communism, tribal society. They shared everything. Okay? But then somehow, one group of people started to exploit another group of people. Okay? And that's how feudalism came about, where aristocrats and landlords. Okay? Aristocrats exploited landlords. In fact, they said, in some societies, there was another stage here called slavery, when there were slaves and slaveholders. And then slavery system was replaced by feudalism, where two classes, aristocrats and peasants. But then they said, naturally, historical laws, they said, natural laws of history, see, natural laws of history, they move society further. And what happens, two new classes come to the picture. Middle class, bourgeoisie, and the working class. And eventually they phase out all classes of people. But capitalism, according to natural laws, creates its own grave digger. Industrial working class. So this second class of people, they are grave diggers. Why are they grave diggers? Because they work together under the same roof. And they develop this the feeling of comradeship, collectivism. So they think the same way, they speak the same language, they are oppressed by the same kind of groups of people. Okay? See, very kind of convincing. And they said, according to natural laws of history, at some point, there would be, I'm using Christian terminology here, final judgment. So these workers would revolt against them. They would kick out these rich pigs. And then there will be paradise on the earth. That's where religion steps in. Religion without religion. So they had this powerful prophecy that according to historical laws, scientific laws, quote unquote, okay, at some point there would be a revolution when the old society would be dismissed, phased out, and the new paradise would come, golden age of communism, where people would have no property, where people would be brothers and sisters. It's like, did you see this picture, Peaceable Kingdom? When the lamb and lions would be together, be friends with each other. And everybody would love each other, so communism. Okay, there would be no private property. But between capitalism and communism, there would be this transitional stage, socialism. Okay, that's when dictatorship or proletariat will be phasing out rich people. We will be kicking out rich people. There would be war between two groups of people. And eventually we will enter this utopia. See, they use this kind of Judeo-Christian prophecy that about paradise. Only unlike Christian paradise, they said, we are going to build paradise on the earth. Okay? But we scientifically reached this stage. So that is why it became so popular, because it was not just religion itself. Okay? It was spiritual, but at the same time it was quote-unquote scientific. Okay? Because it's a very convincing scheme. And they argued that, in fact, when Karl Marx died, Friedrich Engels, speaking by his grave, he said, Karl Marx did for society what Charles Darwin did for nature. Remember, Charles Darwin argued there is an evolution of species. Okay, species evolve. Okay, and that's what Engels claimed his friend Marx had discovered. He discovered how, according to natural laws, society evolved. Okay, so there was a primitive paradise, but then the fall. Okay, fall into this badness, feudalism, capitalism, transitional state, and then we go to paradise again, but on the higher, advanced level when we have industrial economy. It's a profoundly religious view. The fall, salvation, and who would be the savior? Who would be the chosen one? It's proletariat, working class people. Okay. For Marx, it was especially important because as a Jew himself, he kind of growing up in this culture, so he didn't want to see these Jews being the chosen people. So the chosen people for him, he felt uncomfortable about it. Okay, because he argued that I'm fighting for the freedom of everybody. And he argued that the real chosen people would be the industrial working class. So they would come and save the humankind. Okay? But it resonated with his Jewish culture and Jewish tradition. Okay? Only instead of Jews as a chosen people, he put industrial working class who would come and save the humankind. They would revolt against oppression and usher in communism. See, religion and science. So he married so let's write it down. Marriage, I didn't put it in my PowerPoints, obviously. No. So a lot of stuff I have to change a bit. Okay. So 2 key words. Let's write 2 key words. If you can see it, can you see it here? Something, or no? No, okay. Let me erase here. And I'm going to write 2 words, science, and I will put the word science in quotation marks, because it was a pop science, what he argued. It was just, he made it up, because you know what sometimes people call science, it's not science, it's a junk science. Or at least it sounds convincing. Okay? It looks logical, but at the same time, for instance, the scheme he came up with maybe looks convincing as applied to Europe. But if you look at other countries, Africa, Latin America, Asia, that's not how it works. Okay? So science plus religion. Marxism. His theory is called Marxism. The movement he set up became known as communism. So the theory is Marxism. The movement he set up for action became known as communism. Okay? So revolution was inevitable. But these 2 key words you have to remember, the most important thing. Science and religion. So people cannot exist without a faith, right? And they found their faith. That is why millions of people embraced it. It was like an atheistic faith. Of course, Karl Marx denounced God. He said, God doesn't exist. And what I discovered, it's a new scientific teaching. And everybody should embrace it, because that's the only correct path for the humankind. See? When you speak about the only correct path, so you become yourself a religious person. Little did he know that he did create single-handedly another new atheistic religion. Okay. And it has many, to the present day, that's what empowers this secular religion. To the present day, a lot of people, especially who profess atheism, they embrace this kind of stuff, or at least parts of it. And you know that late in the 20th century, we're going to talk about these countries. Many countries tried to kind of put it in practice, what Karl Marx had said. Okay, like in Soviet Union, in China especially. With the horrible results, of course. But people believe into this, you know, so you cannot argue about religion. I never argue with religious people, especially with militant atheists. Although I'm not a religious person myself. Or militant socialists. You cannot convince them. And you have to understand that it wasn't some kind of evil thing. It's naturally emerged because socialism and communism express this frustrations of the people, this industrial working class people. And they kind of amplify their frustrations. That's what socialism, especially communism, was. The amplified frustrations of the working class people, okay, who tried to act on their frustrations, tried to take on the entire society, to kind of destroy the entire society, because they were frustrated about society. And Marx and Engels, they came to cater to these interests. Okay. Oh, that's here, so I do have it here, that's good. Okay. They also, what I did not mention, I'm glad that I brought it up. They argued, Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels, we should have so-called Communist Party. It's a group of people, enlightened people, who come and explain to workers what they should do, you know? Like apostles. And they thought about themselves as these enlightened people. And interesting, when a German craftsman called Wilhelm Weitling, he was a working class people who called himself communist. He said, I'm a worker, we don't need any kind of group of enlightened people. So all workers on the ground should decide what they needed. Karl Marx and Engels said, oh, you get out of here, you don't understand anything about working class people. We know what you need to do. So there was an interesting argument between this working class person who called himself communist and Marx and Engels, who were convinced they knew what the real working class people needed to do. So they argued that the Communist Party, these enlightened apostles, should explain to workers what they should do, how they should organize themselves. So we do have, during this Industrial Revolution, this period of modernization, fast modernization, we do have the first attempt to bring up communism. It happened in France in 1871, when people with red flags were marching. They tried to revolt. They set up so-called Paris Commune. Okay. And lasted 3 months, but then was squashed by the French troops. In fact, this revolution, the first attempt to make a revolution, happened during the Franco-Prussian War of 1870. Okay, so which created this disarray, disorder, and that's when this first communists tried to step in, and that's what later we could see in European history and in history of other countries. As soon as the wars disrupted the social economic life of the people, immediately communism stepped in and tried to make revolution, because a lot of people are frustrated. Okay. The huge blow at communism was the fact that living standards of working class people improved by the end of the 19th century. That was a disaster. Okay? So that is why in England, which originally sympathized with socialism, by the end of the 19th century, we hardly had any communists left. There were some socialists, like soft socialists, who did not advocate revolution. Okay, who were more on utopian side. But we hardly had any communists in England, because all working class people, they lived a good life. But we do have communism growing where? In Southern Europe, where people were impoverished, in Eastern Europe, okay, in Southern Germany, where people still live miserable lives. And that's what later became the fertile ground for communism, these poor countries, third world countries in the 20th century. Okay. Advanced countries did not embrace communism. Equal division of equal earnings. Oh, by the way, I completely forgot. It's the best metaphor for how communism works in reality. It's George Orwell, Animal Farm. Did you read it? So I recommend. It's a tiny book. It's a fairy tale. It's a fun to read. Okay, if you want to see and don't want to read kind of big, sophisticated books, kind of in the form of a fairy tale describes the animals made the revolution against human beings because they were abused by farmers. So on one farm, animals revolted against Mr. Jones, and the pigs were in charge of this revolution. Pigs were the Communist Party. And when the revolution happened, pigs took over power and became the new class of people. That's what happened in all communist countries. And if you forgot, George Orwell is famous for this expression from this fairy tale. So when other animals asked pigs, why don't you make everybody equal? The pigs told them, so we're special, we made this revolution. All animals are equal, but some animals are more equal than the other animals. That's how it works, you know, when you try to put communism in practice. There always some group of people comes up who are more equal than the others. Okay. Since living standards increased in Europe, in Western Europe, in Northern Europe, so we have militant socialism going to other countries, communism going to other countries. What we have instead, we have so-called revisionism or reformed socialism. And the guy who introduced this was Edmund Bernstein, who was a student of Marx, but who said, hey, unfortunately his prophecy doesn't work. Working class people are not miserable, they live much better. They're not ready to go to barricades. So what do we need to do about it? So he said, we don't need to destroy capitalism, Bernstein said. Capitalism, it's a hen that brings golden eggs. So we shouldn't destroy it. We should squash it a little bit. I squeeze the juice, you know. That's what we need. We should milk this. Not milk, it's not a cow. We should take some of the golden eggs, but not cut the head of this hen. Okay. And that's what they created in Western Europe. Bernstein gave rise to so-called social democratic parties or labor parties. You heard this expression, Labor Party, right, in England. You heard expressions like social democratic party. So that's what he created, the soft, very soft socialism. So you can write these words: Labour Party, Social Democratic Party, Socialist Party in the United States, or present-day Democratic Party that kind of expresses in the United States, that expresses these ideas, especially the left wing of the Democratic Party. So Bernstein was a kind of reformer who reformed the creed. Okay. Marx originally predicted that the communist revolution would happen in the most advanced countries, but it didn't happen. Okay, people did not revolt against their own government in France, in England, in Germany, in the United States. And his prophecy became more popular in underdeveloped countries. Okay, underdeveloped countries. And that's what created this uncomfortable feeling, how to reconcile what was going on in real life with this theology of Marxism. Okay? And that's how in Russia and China they came up with this explanation that working class people should not act alone because there were hardly any working class people, hardly any industry. But they should use peasants as allies, and together they should overthrow oppressors. Okay? That's how it worked in Russia and China later.